Thank you. Thank you. Thank you, Pastor Chris. Just so excited to be here this morning with a great local pastor and a great church that's doing great work for the gospel and for God's kingdom across Monmouth County and even beyond. And I was able to sit in the back as I came in this morning, and I heard Pastor Chris's talk from 10 to 11, and man, was he spot on. I mean, man, he's even going there. That's great. So let's give Pastor Chris round of applause. What a great minister of the gospel and a great leader in ministry here in New Jersey. And we appreciate him, his radio ministry, and then everything else. So again, my name is Shawn Hyland. I serve as the Director of Advocacy for the New Jersey Family Policy Center. There's a PowerPoint this morning that we'll be going through. I also have some flyers with me as well and a legislative scorecard. So it'll show you where your elected officials at the state level voted on policies from the last session that ended in January of this year to 2-year session. And so they started a new one in January. So we covered the past 2 years, what they voted for. And a lot of really bad bills were never voted for, but they were introduced. And so they're listed in here as going to the committee. There's a lot of good bills that were never voted on, but they were introduced. So also listed here what they were and what committee that they were in. So on the way out the door this morning, please stop by and see me, and I'll give you this scorecard as other flyers as well. And again, it's great information. The Family Policy Center, we are part of a national alliance of 42 other state policy councils across America. It's really been founded by Dr. James Dobson from Focus on the Family about 35, 40 years ago. We started these different policy councils, and we're the one here in New Jersey, been in existence for over 25 years. I've been with the team for the past 5 years. And again, we're doing good work in Trenton, but it is a difficult work to say the least here in our state, but yet we are not without hope. Amen? I mean, God is sovereign, God is in control, and God is at work. And so we're excited to do what God has called us to do in helping to advocate for change here in our state. But I'm going to help you today to discover what can you do to advocate for change at the state level and at the local level. So first, I want you to know your rights this morning, because everyone has rights. Whether you're a parent, a student, or a teacher, everyone has rights this morning. You can change to the next slide. So, of course, parents, we'll discuss this in detail, to look at materials and curriculum, to access records of your child, and you would think that should be simple, yet somehow here in New Jersey, it's a battle. 2, as a student, you do have a right to express your faith. It's not if you can express it, it's when and where you can express it in public school, but no one can completely stop you from expressing your Christian faith. And then, of course, as teachers, even you as an individual has certain rights. And if those rights are violated, you do have Title VII employment law that protects your rights as a teacher, your religious rights that can't be violated in public school either. But again, as a teacher, I would caution you to be wise in how you talk to your colleagues, because even though you have the right to express your faith to your colleagues as anyone would to their coworker, I have seen situations in New Jersey where teachers were somewhat set up by their colleagues to get them to say certain things, to then bring them to the school administrator and try to get them into trouble. So again, you do have rights, but be wise in how you do that with your colleagues. Next slide, levels of advocacy. So now let's talk about this here. There's different levels that you need to be aware of, and sometimes that can become kind of confusing to the everyday person who's not as involved as I am in this policy world. One, there's local school boards, which I'm sure many of you may have spoken at in the past, and what they can do. And again, we'll cover this in detail in our presentation, and how you can advocate for change at the local school board level. Then there's the state legislature in Trenton, and I know many people don't like to go to Trenton. Many would rather go to the school board because it's 10 minutes away. And then Trenton, that's an hour away or 30 minutes, depending on where you live. And it's hard to find parking, and you have to sit in a committee hearing for hours, but thankfully we are there, and other parents do come as well to testify. And we'll cover these 2 bills on the screen this morning in detail. Then, of course, there's the governor, and then under the governor, there is the Department of Education, which is under his executive branch. Then there's the State Board of Education, which are volunteers that are appointed by governors. So all those on the state board today were not appointed by Governor Murphy, but they were appointed by governors. And all of them at some point had their terms expired, and we'll see that in a minute. And yet, Governor Murphy today is only replacing those who voted against his standards. Even though everyone has expired, only those that voted against his agenda are being removed. So there's different levels of advocacy, and we're going to cover that this morning, but I wanted you to see that. And please understand that when you hear someone say, please go contact your state senator, they're not talking about Cory Booker or Bob Menendez. That's your U.S. senator. So oftentimes, we always encourage people, make sure you contact your state senator. And they'll say, well, I did. I called up Senator Booker's office. But that's not your state senator. He's in D.C. He's dealing with federal laws. There are state senators in Trenton who represent your district dealing with state laws. Those are the ones you should be contacting. And oftentimes, the school boards and the legislature, they'll try to deflect the blame and point the finger on who's responsible for these policies and these decisions. And they each have a role in this. The school boards do have local home rule and how things are implicated, and they are receiving mandates from the state on what the state wants to be done. But what the state wants to be done, and by law, what the state requires you to do, might be two different things. And we'll see that now in detail. So next slide, local school boards. Well, what is the road back to normal at the local level? Well, the road back to normal is this. Next slide. Repeal the transgender student guidelines, policy 5756. And you know many school districts, at this point, I believe 26 school districts, many here in Monmouth County have already repealed these guidelines. 2, only allow gender identity diversity lessons in health class so families can opt out. We'll see in a second, even though it's mandated for these lessons to be taught, it doesn't say what subject they have to be taught in. That's determined at the local level. Number 3, adopt the transparency in curriculum policy. So even if the state legislators fail to adopt a law mandating or giving directive to the local level to show transparency, your local school board can have their own policy for the local level on how parents can have access to materials. And then number 4, do not allow age inappropriate books in school libraries. Again, we're going to cover this more in detail. So your local school board, at least for the time being, can have local policies that determine what types of books are on that library shelf. So that's the road back to normal at the local level. So as much as we get frustrated about the public school system here in New Jersey, as many mandates and obligations are coming down from the state level, there is some wiggle room at the local level to push back without violating state law, without being penalized by any type of state penalty, and yet fulfilling all the local school board obligations, and yet still addressing the concerns of parents at the local level. So when you go to school boards, these are the 4 statements or the 4 policies that you should be advocating for. And now some more details on this. Transgender student guidelines. Next slide. They are not mandatory. I think now that may have been common knowledge. We knew for years they were not mandatory. We've advocated and educated school boards and parents and community groups. They are not mandatory. So what happened here in the Hanover case that the Attorney General brought against Hanover Township, and also afterwards against Marlboro and Middletown and Manalapan as well, the Attorney General's office admitted that 5756 is not a mandatory policy. The quote on the screen is from the judge in the Hanover Township case, because the Office of the Attorney General, OAG, acknowledged in the court case that the transgender student guidelines were never mandatory in the first place. You may say, well, then why are they making civil rights violations against school boards for repealing them or actually for changing them? Because for some illogical, irrational reason, if you repeal it, there's no penalty. If you change it, you get a civil rights violation. Against legally, it really makes no sense at this point. The courts have to figure all of this out, but they do admit it's not the policy that the AG is fighting on. It is the law against discrimination that the AG is making this case based upon. He says changing the policy violates the New Jersey law against discrimination. That's the Attorney General's position. But nowhere does he say that the policy itself, 5756, is a mandatory state policy, because it never was. When that law was written in 2017 and signed by Governor Murphy, the law said that the Commissioner of Education has to develop and distribute guidelines for transgender students. So the law gave a requirement for the commissioner to develop and to distribute guidelines. But Guidelines are not laws. Laws basically mandated that position, the commissioner, to do something. That's what the legislature and Governor Christie signed. Now, once those guidelines were distributed, now you have guidelines, but that's not actual law. So the Attorney General realizes that, and so therefore he says that because it's the law against discrimination from 2006, that gender identity was added to our discrimination law in New Jersey, like sex and race and religion. You can't discriminate on certain categories. Well, neither can you on gender identity since 2006. He's using that law to try to say that you cannot tell parents about the medical records of their children. Well, that law, NJ Ladd, has never been applied in any such manner. NJ Ladd, the law against discrimination, there's no court precedent for that. There's no court case ever decided in our state that our non-discrimination law says parents should be kept in the dark about their child's medical records. And that's exactly what is happening when schools do not tell parents about the gender identity of their children. So please keep in mind that policy is not mandated, and you should repeal at the local level 5756. Number two, the diversity lessons in K through 12. Next slide. Again, you may have heard that it is law in New Jersey that gender identity must be taught from kindergarten through 12th grade, and that's true. That is a diversity law that was passed in 2021. Even though when that law was first written, it was only written for high school from grades 9 through 12, and in the drafted bill, it was only for health class. But then in the Senate Education Committee, and I was in that Education Committee back then on Zoom because 2021 they were meeting in person, they amended the bill to, instead of doing it only in high school, make it from K to 12. And instead of only in health class, make it where appropriate. Meaning, it can be in lots of subjects wherever the local school board determines is appropriate. In other words, your local school board can still only place these mandated lessons in health class. They don't have to be in language arts. They don't have to be in other subjects. They don't have to be in school assemblies. They don't have to be reading materials in English class. They can only be limited to health class and still fulfill the law from the state. So if you see materials and lessons about gender identity in multiple subjects, nowhere in the law is that required. It's where appropriate. In other words, the local school board makes that determination. So if the local school board tells you, well, this is what the state wants, no, it's not what the state wants. The state says you put it where it's appropriate. It's up to the local community. So please make sure you advocate for those lessons to be limited in health class, because the only place in New Jersey where you are allowed by law to opt out is in health class. You can't opt out of math or science or English or other subjects, but you are legally allowed to opt out of health class. And so therefore, if those lessons are limited or restricted to only health class, your child will not have to be exposed to them or confused by them if you opt out of health class. Next slide, transparency in curriculum. Again, this is federal law, but at the local level, you can adopt policies that give parents easy access to lessons and materials. So the federal level does give parents the right. The Family Education Rights and Privacy Act, FERPA, the Protection of Pupil Rights Amendment as well, both say very clearly that parents have the right to review lessons and materials, observe classroom activities, and have access to their child's school medical records. Again, contrary to what the policy 5756 has said about gender identity, the federal law says that you have rights to review curriculum, materials, lessons, and your child's medical records. So how do we get around some of this secrecy here in the state? Well, if school boards are not going to tell parents the gender identity of their child, then simply the parent can go to the school and say, I want to see my child's medical record and school records. They cannot, by federal law, give you something different than what they have. If they have something on your student, whether it's medical related, whether it's their name, whether it's their chosen preferred gender identity at school, if they have something else on your child in that file, they, by federal law, must give that to you. So if they don't volunteer the information as they should and tell you what's going on with your child as they should, you have the federal right to ask that school, I want to see my child's medical record and classroom record as well. And they have to show it to you. So again, know that federal law backs you up. But even at the local level, you should encourage your local school board. You want to see a transparency in curriculum policy. Next slide. And we do have model school board policies on that at the Family Policy Center. So if you want more information about this, please see me afterwards. I'll be in the lobby until the afternoon. Answer your questions. I'll email you those model school board policies that deal with the issues that we just covered. And you can bring that to your school board and say, these are being adopted across the country in school districts across America. Here's the policy. It meets federal law. I want to encourage you to adopt that policy. Obviously, you'll have school board attorneys who will look at that. They'll be unsure of it because they're not maybe aware of these national model policies. And again, realize I'm not speaking in generalities here, but sometimes the school board attorney, they don't want to do the heavy lifting. They don't want to do the hard work. They don't want to push back against the state despite the concerns of the community. They're simply on a contract to do school board policy legal work for a school board. They're not looking to make waves and to make enemies in the state. And so therefore they'll tell you, you can't, you can't, you can't. It's really, they just don't want to. They could, and you can, and you should. And if your school board attorney is the problem in not getting certain policies passed, then you need to replace that school board attorney, because there's nothing that he can really lean on to stop these policies from being in place. Next, at the local level, age-inappropriate books. Your school board can pass policies that give school librarians clear objective guidelines on what types of books can be in the library for certain age groups. And again, we have model policies for elementary, for middle school, and for high school that are being adopted across America that restrict certain books and materials because of certain content, not because of certain viewpoints, not because of certain ideas or certain opinions, because you cannot discriminate based upon viewpoint, you cannot discriminate based upon ideas, but you can restrict materials based upon content, like sexual content, vulgarity, and profanity. Not every book should be allowed to be published onto a shelf paid by tax dollars if they violate sexual or profane material. Just as PBS, Public Broadcasting System, doesn't put out stuff on air of sexual or vulgar nature because it's public broadcasting. So the same with public schools. This is public tax-funded material. You have certain restrictions on what is put on the bookshelf. And not every book is going to be on that shelf. Librarians every year remove books from the bookshelf to make room for new books to be on that bookshelf. So they're always taking out books and adding in books, taking out books and adding in books. So you can take books out of the library to make room for better books. And if the school librarian is confused on what they can and cannot do at the local level, you can have local school board policies that can give them that objective guidelines for which they must follow. Now, the state legislature. That was the local level. Now we're going to the state legislature on what's going on there and how you can advocate at the state legislature. Next slide, Serena Rice. So as I mentioned before, the governor has the right to appoint members to the State Board of Ed, and Governor Christie has, and before him, and now, of course, Governor Murphy. And right now, Governor Murphy is only replacing people on the State Board of Ed who voted no on his equity in education policy and on his sex ed learning standards. If you voted yes, even though your term is expired, you get to stay. If you voted no and your term's expired, I'm replacing you. And again, I got flyers here to show you exactly who's being replaced and why they're being replaced. See me after my talk this morning. And one of the nominees he has brought up is a lady named Serena Rice. So Serena Rice has no education background, never been a teacher, never been a school board member. She is a very, very good friend of the top lobbyist for the NJEA. Now, that's not me saying that. That's not me trying to find some, behind-the-scenes connection. That's me sitting in Trenton and having the top NJEA lobbyist sit next to Serena during her committee hearing and tell the committee I'm her best friend. So I'm not making stuff up to draw lines to try to tell you what I think is happening. I'm telling you she's really good friends with the top lobbyist of the NJEA. And on her social media profile, and this picture of her that you see right now, that's her Facebook profile. That's her. I didn't add or edit it. That's her Facebook profile. Her social media page is filled of derogatory and insulting comments towards parents, celebrating drag queens, and saying she's furious with you if you don't celebrate it, saying that if you try to protect children from cross-sex hormones and puberty blockers, like you try to keep them off of puberty blockers. You try to keep them off of cross-sex hormones. You try to stop them from having surgical operations to change their body. You try to stop that. That's abusive. And yet, the governor is appointing her to be one of 13 people to make state policies for all school boards. And the way the process was, even they know what they tried to do, because normally 3 days before a committee hearing, you'll see the agenda online. Well, this committee was scheduled for 11 a.m. on Thursday. Her name popped up at 5:30 p.m. on Wednesday night, not 3 days before. And I caught it that evening. I was the first one to catch it. And I emailed out all the parental rights groups in the state that night. And I only caught it because we'll see in a minute, I was looking for the Freedom to Read bill, if that was going to be up in the Education Committee the next day. And not by chance, because there's no chance, by God's grace and sovereignty, I seen her name on the committee for the Senate Judiciary. And I became aware and alarmed. And I went down there to testify about what I knew about the process. But I sat there and I heard what the Republican office read about her social media page. And then I thought to myself, this is insane. There's no way this lady can be approved by the committee. We went, we testified. I told the committee members, if you vote her through today, I will put her social media posts all over the internet so everyone can see them. And by 11 o'clock Thursday night, I did. Now, Monday morning, she was supposed to have been voted on and confirmed back in February to be approved, or back in March, I said, to be approved to State Board of Ed. And all weekend long, this website was being shared across the state of her postings on social media. And by Monday morning, they pulled her name off of the agenda because they had concerns. And to give credit to everyone else, the people in the legislature even said, there's a lot of people, even in the majority party, who were very troubled by her comments on social media. But they were unaware of that until we put it online for everyone to see. So sometimes if it's done in secret and done in the dark, they get away with it. But when it's exposed and brought to the light, they real fast pull back from it. But they wait until the heat and the passion and the eyes get distracted, and then they try to move her again. And I can't go into detail because of time this morning, and we're still fighting that fight. Please stay engaged with us as we continue to battle Serena Rice's nomination. But I was checking, not for her, I was checking for the next slide, the Freedom to Read Act. Because this is a bill here in New Jersey where they are trying to change the criminal code to allow teachers and librarians to give materials to children that violate our pornography and obscenity law here in the state. So here's a couple examples of some books. I won't go into content today or show pictures, obviously, but we're calling this not the Freedom to Read Act, which is what the sponsors call it, but the Freedom to Distribute Obscene Materials to Minors Act. Now, for years, our national lawyers that we deal with at the national level, whether it's ADF, Alliance Defending Freedom, whether Family Policy Alliance, our national umbrella organization, or many others, they've always told us, when you're advocating against certain books, never use the word pornographic, never use the word obscene, because they require certain high level of standards of proof, because you really are saying someone's committing a crime, because there's criminal activity to give pornography to children. So if you say these books are pornography and to be given to children, you're accusing someone of committing a crime. So our national attorneys have always said, try to use the words explicit sexual content, sexual activity, sexual images, because that's true, without accusing someone of committing a crime. And all of that made sense until the Freedom to Read bill. Because now in the Freedom to Read bill, next slide, they are literally trying to change the criminal code in New Jersey. The Freedom to Read bill in Section 13 literally amends the current obscenity law for persons under 18. Right now in New Jersey, and this is in red, this is state law, word for word, a person who knowingly sells, distributes, rents, or exhibits to a person under 18 years of age obscene material is guilty of a crime of the third degree. But the bill continues to go on, this is word for word from the bill, that it gives an affirmative defense to a prosecution from that law for teachers, teaching staff members, school librarians, and staff members of public libraries when performing their job duties. In other words, it's still illegal to give children obscene materials except if you're a teacher or a librarian doing their job. So if someone off the street was to give certain books or materials to your child, they will get arrested. But this Freedom to Read bill will amend that to say unless they're a teacher and librarian during school hours, then they can give them that material and they'll be free from prosecution. Next slide. So again, back in February, they tried to pass that bill. We got a whole bunch of people together to go to Trenton that day to advocate against the bill. And at the last second, guess what happened? The bill was never heard in the committee. They pulled it right away. Why? Because we invented a website called jerseyvotesno.com. And we listed on the website how this bill amends the criminal code. And right away, they got embarrassed about pushing forth the bill that's basically telling everybody else it's illegal to give kids certain materials unless you're a teacher. Listen, at the end of the day, if you have to amend the criminal code to give a kid a book, that's a problem. That's a problem. That's exactly what they were doing. So thankfully, we showed up, we advocated, we let everyone else know across the state, and they pulled the bill. Then we were told by the media and by others in March, they're going to put the bill back up again, and it's going to be amended. So get ready. So we advocated, we put the word out on our action alerts and our emails. Other groups did as well, obviously. And come March, guess what happened? The bill never came up yet because they know that we're still watching. Now, if you look at the media and you see news reports about the bill, it seems so innocent, so good, and yet they're not telling the facts about the bill. I've seen opinion pieces, editorials about the bill that were so good, and it gets so frustrating because the real facts are being left out. And then when we write an opinion piece to be published in the paper, nobody ever publishes it. And so they're trying to win the narrative in the general public. So our voice is seeming correct. And as they begin to do that slowly, when they think they're ready, then they'll try to bring the bill up thinking they have mainstream support. But no one's telling anyone the truth about the bill. Next slide, though. Another issue we're dealing with at the state level is trying to lower the age of consent for mental health services from the current 16 years of age to 13 years of age. Now, it was amended to 14 years of age, but they were trying to lower it to 13 years of age without the parents' knowledge. Yet studies show, both at the state level and the federal level, to reduce suicide rates, you want parental involvement. The more the parents are involved in a child's life, the more suicide rates decrease. And yet this bill is pushing parents out of the child's life that's dealing with mental health because it's not really about preventing depression and suicide. It's about gender-affirming care for the child without the parent's knowledge or permission that it's even happening. So you want to help kids dealing with true mental health issues of depression, anxiety, fear, suicide. You want parents involved in the child's life. If you have other agendas or other reasons for counseling that you don't want the parent involved in the child's life, then you try to lower the age of consent where the parent is not allowed to be in that conversation unless, as Pastor Chris said, the kid decides. Then they'll bring the parent in. So the next slide. There are 3 reasons right now in New Jersey where the parents are kept in the dark by state law. One is abortion. At any age, your child can have an abortion and you will not be notified. Sexually transmitted diseases or infections. At the age of 13 and above, you will not be notified. So if a 13-year-old child goes in and gets STI treatment by Planned Parenthood, you'll never be notified about it. And of course, now mental health, they're trying to lower down to age 14 as well. And we're hearing reports from about MyChart, the online medical records that you have online, that if you're above 12 years old, some hospitals are not allowing parents to see the medical records above 12 years old. Now, there is a bill in our legislature to stop that, to actually make sure hospitals show parents medical records of their child.
You would think that bill wouldn't be necessary, but yet it's a bill now been sponsored because the facts are a lot of parents are having problems with medical hospitals showing them their child's medical record. Next issue real fast before we get to advocacy here is Assembly Bill 4120, which is kind of similar to the Freedom to Read bill, but it is different. It will withhold state funding to local school districts. Now, most school districts have already been crippled by the lack of state funding, but it will withhold state funding to local school districts if they do not allow obscene materials, certain books on the bookshelf. So if the local level passes certain policies I've told you are model policies to prevent obscene materials from being on the bookshelf, if they did do that, the state can't stop them from doing that, but they will withhold state funding to that school district for doing it. Again, it's not law yet, but it has been sponsored and awaiting a committee hearing. So these are things that are going on at the state level. Now, as we wrap up the next 10 minutes here, what are some actions that you can take at the local and state level? Advocacy actions. There are things you can do. We covered the bills, we covered the policies. Now, here are the action steps. One, next slide. On May 16th, there is a Parental Rights Coalition lobbying day in Trenton. I want to encourage you guys, if you can come that day from 10 a.m. to 1 p.m. to Trenton. I'll be there. Other parental rights groups will be there. We're trying to stop legislators in the hallway and 2 committee hearings that day that deal with these types of bills to hear from us, to be handed letters from us and flyers from us on why the bills I covered this morning are so troubling. So please put May 16th on your calendar. If you can't come, still put it on your calendar because that's the day we need you to call your state legislator. So even if you can't come to Trenton, you call them that day. That way, when they're in Trenton and they're being stopped by dozens of people and they're getting flyers and letters from us, then they go back to their office after Trenton and they've been told by their constituent director at the local office, I got 40 phone calls today about these bills. He's like, you know what? People stopped me in the hallway about these bills. Then they realize we're watching and we're working and we're communicating. So please sign up for our emails, get more information about that. But May 16th is a crucial day for parental rights in our state. Next slide. Now more practically, day in and day out, advocating for change. Please make sure when you communicate to school boards, you're saying the facts. And that's why I came here today to give you some of the facts. I've got flyers with facts. I've got an email address. You can email me for facts. I want to make sure when they hear from us, they're hearing the truth. And I've been in situations where good people who are well-intentioned are trying to advocate for good, but they've been misinformed themselves. And so they might mistakenly or unknowingly be saying something that's not true to the school board. And the school board members or attorney might know better. And then we either look like we don't know what we're talking about, or we ourselves are trying to say something that's not true. And that's not our intention. So please make sure you always say that which is true. And of course, say it with respect, because you're always representing Christ when you go before these school boards. You want to make sure that God is glorified in how we conduct ourselves. Going viral, being widely outspoken to get 1 million hits on Instagram or TikTok. You may think it does the cause good, but if God's name is not being glorified, then it does more harm to the gospel. God can do good and God can get glory at the same time without us going viral by being angry and threatening and mean to people. You say, Shawn, that never happens. Sometimes the criticisms from the left, sometimes they hurt, but they're true sometimes. I've seen people go above and beyond what is required to communicate truth to those in power. When you go to testify at boards of education, next slide, we're almost out of time here. No matter what school board meeting that there is, you can speak about these issues, even if it's not on the agenda. So on the school board agenda and every meeting, there are agenda items and then non-agenda times. So when they want public comments for the agenda items, you have to stick only to those items. But then afterwards, they have open comments on any issue unrelated to the agenda that night. That's your opportunity to speak about the issues we covered today, even if they're not on the agenda for that specific meeting. So please go anyway and begin to address the school board on these issues. Have a 3-minute testimony. Sometimes you can go 5 minutes. But if there's many people, they're going to cut it down to 3 minutes. So prepare for 3 and go longer if you can. Prepare a 3-minute testimony ready to go. You should be good. Speak to the board and not to the audience, meaning if there are people there who are insulting you, trying to aggravate you, calling you names, and I've been there. You're not talking to them. You're talking to the school board. Okay, keep your eyes on the people that you're talking to. It might seem very normal to go back and answer what they're saying. But when you're doing that, one, you're losing time because that's being counted against your time. And two, you're getting off target and off message, exactly what the enemy would love you to do. And then you fail to communicate what you want to communicate. And then the school board cuts you off. You're like, but I'm not done yet. But you ran out of time. And the enemy was successful in getting you off mission. So don't address the comments and just speak to the school board. You're on a mission. Don't expect them to answer you back. If they just listen, I want an answer. They're under legal advice. Do not answer anything. That's fine. You want to communicate to them. You want to talk to them. They're not going to answer you. Don't expect an answer. It doesn't mean they're ignoring you. It just means they're listening. And of course, write them an email afterwards. Meaning you had your 3 minutes. Your work's not done yet. The next day, follow up with an email to them. This is what I said last night. I want to encourage you once again. And you keep that relationship going. I've seen many school boards across New Jersey. It took many, many months for that school board to make different decisions. Sometimes it took a different election. But sometimes it took the relationship slowly begin to change their opinion. So make sure you follow up and follow up. Now the state legislature. Next slide. And please make sure you sign up for our emails every Thursday. We'll send in an email updating you what's going on in our state, action alerts, when to contact legislators, what to say to them. We ask you to call your legislator. Believe me, that's so important to call your legislator. Filling out the form is great. And let's be honest here, most people never fill out that form. You get the email, hey, click here, contact your legislator. Name, address, zip code. If you do it once, the cookies in your web browser already saves your information, and easier the second time around. But even then, most people don't do it. For example, we'll send out an email, tens and tens and tens of thousands of people. I mean, we have a pretty large emailing list. Our open rate is actually really, really good. Like 60% of people who are on our list open our emails. That's great. Normally it's like 30%. Like 60% open our email. So again, tens of thousands seeing it. Those clicking on the form to contact their legislator, maybe 1,000. They received it, they opened it, they clicked on it. And then they wonder why the legislature does what they do. They don't think we're listening. They don't think we're watching. Or they don't think we care because we don't click. Call your legislator. For every phone call they get, they think that's 1,000 people right there. Because they know for you to pick up that phone and to make a 30-second phone call, they know if that's how you feel, there must be 1,000 more that feel that way. So 10 phone calls are like 10,000 voters to them because most people never pick up the phone. But when you do, that really magnifies the message. And then two, please vote. You may say, well, that seems pretty simple. Unfortunately, most people don't vote except for the president, maybe for the governor. So when the president runs, there's like a 70% voter turnout. When the governor runs, it's like a 50% voter turnout. And when it's the state legislature, it's a 30% voter turnout. So real fast here, that freedom to read bill we covered before, but changing the obscenity code for allowing librarians to give certain books to kids. The person who sponsored that bill, he won his election by a few percentage points, like 52% to 48%, just back in November. And that's only of 30% of the voters. So 30% of the people voted, and he got about 52% of them. So overall, he got maybe 16% of all registered voters. And he win. Now, some people don't even vote at all. They can't, right? They're too young. Maybe they got a criminal background. Maybe they're illegal. So they're not even registered to vote. So you count people in his district, he got 9% of people in his district to vote for him. And yet now he's sponsoring bills to change the criminal code in our state to allow obscene materials to children. So you think elections don't matter, but these guys are in office not because the majority of people voted for them. It's because the majority of people who voted for them. And most people don't vote. So please make sure you do that. Next slide, stay informed on the policies. Again, you got our emails online, that would be great. I'll come to local events. You want me to speak to parent groups as well? We do this outside of church pulpits. We do it in living rooms or in community centers as well. We'll come and fill you in. Again, come to our events. We do an event June 18th and 19th, one in up North Jersey, one in Toms River, and then one down in South Jersey as well. Kelvin Cochran will be with us. He was the Atlanta fire chief that got fired a few years ago because he wrote a book that mentioned marriage between a man and a woman, and they fired him as the fire chief of Atlanta for his religious views. Of course, he sued, and of course, he won, because it's a violation, but he'll be coming to speak June 18th and 19th, so please come to our events. Next slide, please run for school board. Yes, at the end of the day, we need people to run for school board. It's not impossible. These two ladies in the screen right there, they never ran for school board, never been to a school board meeting, and then last year, lady with the blonde hair, she felt in her heart that God wanted her to run for school board down in Galloway Township. She didn't know what to do. Never been to a school board meeting, but she felt, I need to do this. Very simple. You get 10 signatures from your county clerk. You want to run for school board, and you get on the ballot, and next thing you know, you knock on doors. And these two ladies with no experience in politics, with no money, never been to a school board meeting, actually won their school board election back in November. And now they serve down in Galloway Township. And believe me, they're making a huge, huge difference down there in advocating for change. So don't say it can't be done. It really can be done. And we need you to do that. And then finally here, next slide, organize like-minded people to help advocate for change. That's the biggest thing, is organization. The one thing the other side does really, really well is they organize. They're very well organized, and they communicate very, very well. So what I have experienced is we receive content really good. We receive information really good. And then when we carry it out, there's certain individuals who are very passionate about carrying it out, which is very good. But if we organize better, then we could be more, God bless you, then we could be better. Amen. See, amen back there. Amen. So organize people. And please, at the end of the day, as we wrap up here in the next minute, it's not the pastor's job to do the organizing, to do the rallying, to get the troops together. His job is to preach and teach the gospel, to equip you, to build you up, to train you so that you can go out and do the work that God has called you to do. And sometimes I've seen people put so much pressure on, Pastor, we need you to do this, we need you to do this. And no, God's equipped you through your pastor to do this. So instead of looking for someone else to take the lead, you can take the lead. You can go to Trenton. You can go to the school board. You can organize your friends. You can build groups online. You can educate people. You can be the one that makes a huge, huge difference here in our state. It's not just from coming from the pulpits. It's the pulpits to the people, and then the people go out there and they do the work that God's called them to do. Amen? Amen. So next slide here, guys. Thank you so much for having me this morning. I know there's lots of stuff, lots of information. I know we're about 10 minutes from our next speakers. I want to give you guys a break and be on time. So again, please see me. My name is Shawn Hyland. I'll be in the lobby afterwards, answer your questions, give you flyers, and give you all the facts that you need to advocate well at the local and the state level. Thank you guys so much. God bless you.